The marriage certificate felt like a funeral shroud in Aria Whitmore's trembling hands as she stood before a man whose face she had never seen, whose voice she had never heard, whose name, Bastien Ravencroft, meant absolutely nothing to her beyond 3 desperate letters exchanged through a matrimonial agency that catered to women with nowhere else to turn. Her stepfather's knuckles had left fresh bruises along her ribs that morning, hidden beneath the simple gray dress she wore, and her mother had watched with dead eyes as Aria signed away her future to escape the nightmare her present had become. The stranger before her was tall, impossibly still, draped in black despite the summer heat, and when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, he simply nodded once and gestured toward a car that looked far too expensive for whatever arrangement this truly was. Aria climbed into the vehicle with her single battered suitcase, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack through her chest. Her new husband said nothing, drove in perfect silence through the city streets as afternoon bled into evening, as familiar neighborhoods gave way to unfamiliar ones, as the urban landscape eventually surrendered to winding roads that climbed into hills she had never visited. She tried to speak twice. Both times her voice died in her throat, strangled by exhaustion and fear and the surreal nature of having legally bound herself to a complete stranger just to escape the fists and cruel words that had defined the last 5 years of her 22-year-old life. When the car finally stopped, night had fallen completely. Aria blinked at what stood before her, certain she was hallucinating from stress. A mansion. No. A castle rose from the hilltop like something torn from a Gothic painting, all pale stone that seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight, soaring towers and vast windows that reflected the stars. Marble steps led to doors that looked heavy enough to seal a tomb. "Where are we?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Bastien Ravencroft turned to look at her for the first time since the ceremony, and Aria's breath caught. She hadn't been able to see his face clearly in the dim courthouse, but now, in the silvery light, she saw features so perfect they seemed carved rather than born. Pale, pale skin, hair that fell in white blonde waves to his shoulders, eyes that caught the moonlight and threw it back in shades of silver and ice. "Home," he said simply. His voice was deep, accented with something old-world and unplaceable. Then he exited the car and moved toward the castle with fluid grace that made no sound. Aria grabbed her suitcase and hurried after him, her practical shoes clicking loudly on the marble steps. The doors opened before he touched them. Inside, the entrance hall was a cathedral of white marble and soaring ceilings, lit by chandeliers that cast everything in soft golden light. Statues lined the walls, beautiful, terrible things depicting figures in various states of grace and agony. The air smelled of night-blooming flowers and something else, something Aria couldn't identify, something that made her skin prickle with instinctive unease. "The east wing is yours," Bastien said, still not looking at her. "You'll find everything you require. Do not enter the west wing. Do not leave the castle grounds after dark. Do not invite anyone here without my permission." "I don't understand." Aria's fingers tightened on her suitcase handle. "What is this place? What kind of marriage is this supposed to be?" Now he did turn, and the weight of his gaze made her take an involuntary step backward. "A marriage of convenience, Miss Whitmore. You needed escape. I needed—" He paused, something flickering across his perfect face. "A solution to a different problem. You're safe here. You'll want for nothing. In exchange, you'll maintain the appearance of being my wife and follow the rules I've given you." "That's it?" Aria heard the hysteria creeping into her voice. "I'm just supposed to live in this enormous place and pretend to be married to you?" "Yes." The word was final, absolute. "Valentina will show you to your rooms. I have business to attend to." He turned away, his black coat sweeping behind him, and vanished down a corridor before Aria could form another question. She stood alone in the marble hall, her heart sinking, wondering if she had escaped one prison only to enter another. "This way, mistress!" Aria jumped. A woman had appeared at her elbow, young, beautiful, with the same unsettling paleness as Bastien, the same white blonde hair, though hers was intricately braided. She wore a high-necked black dress that looked simultaneously modern and ancient. "I'm Valentina," the woman said, her smile not quite reaching her strange, light eyes. "I manage the household staff. Come, you must be exhausted. The East Wing proved to be a series of connected rooms that could have housed Aria's entire childhood home 3 times over. A bedroom with a canopy bed draped in silk, a sitting room with furniture that looked antique and priceless, a bathroom tiled in veined marble with a bathtub deep enough to swim in, closets already filled with clothes in her exact size, though she had never sent measurements to anyone. "How did you know?" Aria asked, running her fingers over a dress of deep emerald velvet. Valentina's smile remained fixed. "Master Bastien is very thorough. Dinner will be brought to your room. I suggest you rest. The first night in a new home can be disorienting." She left before Aria could ask what that meant. Alone in the beautiful, terrifying rooms, Aria sank onto the edge of the massive bed and finally let herself cry. Not from sadness exactly, from relief that she would never again feel her stepfather's fists, from confusion about what she had gotten herself into, from exhaustion that went bone deep. Eventually, she bathed, the hot water soothing her bruised ribs. She ate the dinner that appeared on a cart outside her door, rich foods she couldn't identify, all delicious, none of it quite like anything she had tasted before. She dressed in a nightgown from the closet, soft as clouds, and climbed into the enormous bed. Sleep claimed her instantly, pulling her down into darkness deeper than any she had known. When Aria woke, everything was wrong. The ceiling above her wasn't the canopy she remembered, it was smooth marble, intricately carved with patterns that seemed to move in the flickering light. The bed beneath her was different too, harder, covered in furs and fabrics that felt ancient. The air tasted strange, heavier, charged with something that made her skin hum. She sat up slowly, her head spinning. This wasn't her room, this wasn't even the same style as her room. This was older, grander, darker. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling within it. Tapestries hung everywhere, depicting battles between beautiful pale figures and ordinary humans. The windows she looked, and her heart stopped. The view beyond the glass wasn't the hillside garden she had glimpsed before sleeping. It was something else entirely, a city of marble and dark stone spread out beneath a sky that held 3 moons instead of 1. Towers rose like frozen lightning. Bridges of impossible delicacy connected buildings that defied gravity, and everywhere, moving through the streets far below, she saw figures dressed in elaborate clothes, their skin pale as death, their movements too fluid to be human. "You're awake." Aria spun so fast she nearly fell off the bed. Bastien stood in the doorway, but he looked different now, more himself somehow. He had shed the concealing modern clothes for garments that belonged in a museum, black silk and leather, embroidered with silver threads, cut in styles that predated anything Aria recognized. His white hair was loose around his shoulders. His silver eyes seemed to glow faintly in the firelight. "Where am I?" Aria demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "What did you do to me?" "You're in my true home," Bastien said quietly, stepping into the room. "The Eternal Court, the heart of the vampire kingdom." Aria's laugh came out sharp and wrong. "That's not funny. Vampires aren't real. This is some kind of trick. I am Bastien Ravencroft, king of the eternal night, lord of the Crimson Court, and keeper of the ancient blood." His voice remained calm, but power thrummed beneath every word. "And yes, vampires are very real. You're standing in our capital city, which exists in a realm adjacent to yours, accessible only through thresholds like my castle. You're here because you're my wife now, and that means you're under my protection, which you needed more desperately than you realized." Aria backed away until she hit the carved headboard. "This is insane. You're insane. I need to go home." "You have no home." The words were gentle but inflexible. "Your stepfather sold you." The room tilted. "What?" Bastien moved closer, his expression almost sympathetic. "The matrimonial agency you used is a front. It connects desperate humans with vampire families seeking servants, blood sources, or entertainment. Your stepfather discovered this and sold you to the highest bidder. You were supposed to be delivered to Lord Constantine, a vampire with a taste for causing pain. I intercepted the transaction and married you myself to prevent that fate." Aria couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "You're lying." "I wish I were." He pulled a folded paper from somewhere in his elaborate coat and held it out. "The sale contract signed by your stepfather. You were worth $5,000 to him. Lord Constantine would have tortured you for decades before finally draining you dry. She didn't want to take the paper, didn't want to see proof that her stepfather, already cruel, already hateful, had actually sold her like livestock. But her hand moved anyway, trembling, and unfolded the document. There was his signature, bold and careless. There were the terms, spelled out in legal language that made her stomach heave. There was her name, listed under commodity. "He told me the agency was legitimate," Aria whispered. "He gave me the brochure himself, said it was my last chance to make something of my worthless life." The laugh that escaped her was broken. "He made sure I'd sell myself. And I made sure you'd survive." Bastien took the contract back gently. "You're my wife by vampire law now. That makes you untouchable. No one in this realm can harm you without facing my judgment. You're safer here than you ever were in the human world." Aria looked up at him, this beautiful, terrible creature who claimed to be a vampire king. "Why? Why would you do this? What do you get out of it?" Something flickered in those silver eyes. Pain, maybe, or something older and more complicated. "Vampires have laws, Miss Whitmore, ancient laws that even kings must follow. One such law states that a vampire ruler must be bonded married, or they forfeit their throne after their first century of rule. My century ended 3 months ago. The rival factions have been circling ever since, waiting for me to be declared forfeit." He turned away, his coat swirling. "I needed a wife. You needed salvation. It's a practical arrangement." "You could have married another vampire," Aria said, trying to understand. "No." The word was sharp. "I could not. For reasons that are my own, I will never bond with another vampire. A human wife satisfies the law's letter without its spirit. You help me keep my throne. I keep you alive and free from torture. It's equitable." Aria wanted to argue, wanted to scream that nothing about this was equitable, that she hadn't agreed to be transported to a vampire realm, that she was terrified and confused and still half certain she was hallucinating. But she looked out the impossible window at the 3-moon sky and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was real. Vampires were real, and she had married their king. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Bastien turned back to know her, and for a moment his expression was almost kind. "Now you rest. Recover from your journey between realms. Tomorrow I'll show you the court and explain the role you'll need to play. You'll be presented as my queen, which means you'll need training in our customs and etiquette. But tonight you're safe. You have my word." "The word of a vampire king." Aria couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "The word of your husband," he corrected gently, "which among my people is binding unto death. I will protect you, Aria Whitmore. That is not a kindness. It is simply law. But perhaps it's enough for now." He left before she could respond, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. Aria stood alone in the impossible room, in the impossible realm, and tried to understand how her life had shattered and reformed so completely in less than 24 hours. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her back to the bed. She lay staring at the carved ceiling, watching the patterns seem to shift and flow until sleep claimed her again. The next days passed in a blur of overwhelming newness. Valentina, who Aria learned was one of Bastien's oldest servants, turned during the Renaissance, became her constant companion and teacher. She explained that vampires organized themselves into courts and bloodlines, that they fed on human blood but had long ago established laws to prevent needless killing, that they lived in this parallel realm to avoid human hunters and maintain their secrecy. "We can cross into your world through thresholds," Valentina explained as they walked through gardens filled with flowers that bloomed only under moonlight. "The castle master Bastien maintains on the hilltop is one such threshold. It exists in both realms simultaneously. Most vampires maintain at least one such place." "So he really did drive me up there," Aria said, "and then brought me through while I was sleeping." "The crossing is easier when humans are unconscious," Valentina confirmed. "The conscious mind resists what it doesn't understand. You're adapting well, though. Some humans never quite accept the reality of our world." Aria wanted to say she hadn't accepted anything, but that would be a lie. She was walking through a garden under 3 moons, talking to a vampire who had been alive for 500 years, preparing to be presented as queen to a court of immortal predators. Acceptance was the only option other than madness. The presentation came at the end of her first week in the Eternal Court. Valentina dressed her in a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to capture and reflect light like water, styled her dark hair in an elaborate arrangement that took 2 hours, and painted her face with cosmetics that made her look older, more regal, more like she belonged among creatures of eternal beauty. "You're naturally lovely," Valentina said, studying her work. "That will help. The court respects beauty." "What else do they respect?" Aria asked nervously. "Strength, confidence, the appearance of fearlessness even when you're terrified." Valentina met her eyes in the mirror. "They're predators, Mistress Aria. They'll sense fear and exploit it if they can. You must remember that you're their queen now, whether you feel like one or not. Walk like you own the ground beneath your feet, speak like your words carry weight, and stay close to Master Bastien. His protection is absolute, but only if you're near enough for him to enforce it." The throne room was vast enough to echo, built entirely from white and black marble that created a dizzying checkerboard pattern. Enormous columns rose to a ceiling painted with scenes of vampire history, beautiful and terrible images of conquest, artistry, romance, and blood. The throne itself sat on a raised dais at the far end, carved from a single piece of obsidian that seemed to drink in light, and around that throne, gathered in their finest clothes, stood what had to be hundreds of vampires. All of them turned to watch as Bastien led Aria into the room, his hand firm on her elbow. The silence was absolute, crushing. Aria forced herself to keep walking, to keep her head high, to look at nothing but the throne ahead, even as she felt hundreds of predatory gazes weighing her, judging her, finding her wanting. When they reached the dais, Bastien turned to face the court, keeping Aria at his side. His voice carried effortlessly through the vast space. "Lords and ladies of the Eternal Court, I present to you Aria Ravencroft, my chosen bride and your queen. She is under my protection and bears my name. Any who threaten or harm her threaten and harm me directly, and will face punishment according to the ancient laws." A murmur rippled through the gathered vampires. Aria caught fragments of it: surprise, skepticism, calculation. She felt like a rabbit surrounded by wolves. Then a figure stepped forward from the crowd, and the murmuring died. He was tall like Bastien, with the same pale skin and white hair. But where Bastien's features held a certain warmth despite their perfection, this vampire's face was cold as winter, beautiful as poisoned ice. His clothes were deep crimson, embroidered with black, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had never known fear. "How touching," the vampire said, his voice like silk over razors. "Our noble king has finally married. Tell me, Bastien, did you find this little human through the same black market that supplies Lord Constantine? Or did you steal her directly from some desperate situation?" "Lord Constantine, your concern is noted and dismissed." Bastien's voice remained calm, but Aria felt the tension in his hand where it gripped her elbow. "My marriage is legitimate and binding. That's all that matters." "Is it?" Constantine circled closer, his red eyes fixed on Aria. "The law requires a bonding, not merely a marriage, a true union of souls and blood. Has your little human bride received your blood, Majesty? Does she carry your mark? Or is this just another one of your elaborate attempts to circumvent laws you find inconvenient?" Aria didn't understand half of what he was saying, but she understood the challenge in his voice. Understood that this vampire wanted to undermine Bastien somehow, wanted to use her as the weapon to do it. "The marriage is recognized under both human and vampire law," Bastien said, each word precise and hard. "That satisfies the requirements for maintaining my throne." "Does it?" Constantine smiled, showing elongated fangs. "Shall we consult the Council of Elders? I'm sure they'd be fascinated to hear how you've technically married a human but refused to actually bond with her. How you're using this girl as a legal shield while maintaining your precious isolation." He looked directly at Aria now. "Tell me, little queen, has your husband even kissed you? Or are you just another piece of furniture in his collection of beautiful things?" Heat flooded Aria's face. Before she could think of a response, before she could think at all, Bastien moved. One moment he was beside her. The next he had crossed the space to Constantine in a blur of motion too fast for her eyes to follow, his hand wrapped around the other vampire's throat. "You will not address my wife disrespectfully," Bastien said softly. The entire throne room had gone deathly silent. "You will not question my choices or my authority, and you will remember that I am still king here, Constantine, no matter how much you covet the throne. Challenge me directly if you dare, but leave her out of your political games." For a long moment the two vampires stared at each other, power crackling between them like lightning. Then Constantine smiled again, unperturbed by the hand at his throat. "Of course, Majesty. My apologies to your lovely bride." The words dripped with false sincerity. "I merely wanted to ensure the legitimacy of our new queen. After all, we wouldn't want any complications." Bastien released him and returned to Aria's side in another blur of inhuman speed. The rest of the presentation passed in a haze. Vampires approached in careful succession to offer congratulations that sounded more like assessments. Aria smiled and nodded and tried to remember the coaching Valentina had given her about court etiquette. All the while she felt Constantine's red eyes on her, calculating and cold. When it was finally over, Bastien escorted her back to her chambers in silence. Only when they were alone did he speak. "I apologize for Constantine's behavior. He's been trying to claim the throne for decades. Your presence has complicated his plans." "Why does he hate you so much?" Aria asked, sinking into a chair. Her legs felt shaky from hours of standing and the weight of all those predatory stares. Bastien was quiet for a long moment. "Because I killed the woman he loved," he said finally. 300 years ago. She was dangerous, mad with bloodlust. She had slaughtered entire villages. The law demanded her execution, and as king I carried it out myself." His expression was distant, haunted. "Constantine has wanted revenge ever since. He cannot challenge me directly, I'm too powerful. But he can undermine me politically, legally. If he can prove our marriage is invalid, the council will strip my throne. And then he'll have what he wants." Aria's chest tightened. "So I really am just a shield, a legal loophole." "Yes." Bastien met her eyes, and there was something raw in his gaze. "I won't lie to you about that. But it doesn't change the fact that you're safer here, as my wife, than you would be anywhere else. Constantine's obsession with me makes you valuable. As long as I protect you, you're untouchable. And if something happens to you?" The question came out smaller than Aria intended. "Then you return to the human world immediately." Bastien moved to a writing desk and pulled out a small wooden box. "This contains documents that will establish a new identity for you. Money and human accounts. Deeds to properties in 3 different countries. If I fall, you take this and run. Valentina knows to help you cross the threshold and disappear." Aria stared at the box. "You've thought of everything." "I've been a king for a very long time," Bastien said quietly. "I know how to plan for contingencies, but I don't intend to fall. Which means you're safe. You have my word." He left the box on the desk and moved toward the door. Aria found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Constantine was right, wasn't he? About the bonding thing. There's something you're not telling me." Bastien froze, his hand on the doorframe. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, without turning around, he said, "Vampire bonding is intimate. It involves an exchange of blood that creates a permanent connection between souls. Once bonded, vampires can feel each other's emotions, locate each other across any distance, share strength and life force. It's meant to be done between true partners, between people who love each other." His voice had gone very quiet. "I told you I would never bond with another vampire. I had my reasons. But bonding with you, a human, would be different, safer for my heart, and it would strengthen the legitimacy of our marriage beyond any challenge." "But you haven't asked me," Aria said slowly. "Why?" Now he did turn, and the expression on his perfect face was complex, sad and resigned, and something else she couldn't name. "Because I won't force that intimacy on you. You didn't choose this marriage, not really. You were cornered into it by desperation and cruelty. The least I can do is preserve what autonomy I can for you. You're my wife by law. That has to be enough." He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Aria sat in the quiet of her beautiful chambers and felt something shift in her chest. This vampire king, this creature who could kill with casual ease, who commanded an entire realm, was trying to protect her choices, trying to give her power in a situation where she had none. It was more than any human man in her life had ever done. The days became weeks. Aria learned to navigate the strange customs of the Eternal Court, to recognize the various factions and bloodlines, to understand the complex politics that governed vampire society. She learned that Bastien ruled with a combination of strength and surprising mercy, that he had ended many of the cruelest practices of previous monarchs, that he was respected even by those who disagreed with him. She also learned that he kept himself distant from his court, that he spent long hours alone in his private study, dealing with matters he never discussed, that he had been king for over 300 years and had never taken a consort, never shown interest in romantic connection, never let anyone close enough to matter. He wasn't always so isolated, Valentina told her one evening as they walked through the castle's library, a room that made Aria's heart sing with its thousands upon thousands of books. When I first came into his service, he was different, warmer. He had friends, lovers, joy. She ran her fingers along a shelf of ancient texts. But something happened about 200 years ago. He changed, became colder, more alone. He never speaks of it, and those of us who were present were forbidden to discuss it. But whatever it was, it hurt him deeply. Aria thought about that as she explored the library, thought about the sadness she sometimes glimpsed in Bastien's silver eyes when he didn't realize she was watching. Thought about the careful distance he maintained between them, always proper, always respectful, never warm. She thought about it even more when Constantine began his campaign of subtle harassment. Nothing overt enough for Bastien to punish, just constant small reminders that Aria didn't belong. Comments about her mortality, observations about how quickly humans aged and died, pointed questions about whether she was happy in her arrangement with the king. Not that. He's trying to drive a wedge between you and Master Bastien, Valentina warned, after Constantine had cornered Aria in a hallway with particularly cutting remarks about being a bought bride. He wants you to resent your position, to feel trapped and used. Then he can go to the council and claim the marriage is coerced and invalid. Isn't it coerced? Aria asked bitterly. I didn't exactly have a choice. You had the choice between this and being Lord Constantine's plaything. Valentina's voice was sharp. Never forget what Master Bastien saved you from. Constantine doesn't just torture his humans, he breaks them, unmakes them, keeps them alive and suffering for decades until they beg for death. I've seen the aftermath. It's worse than you can imagine. Aria shuddered. She knew Valentina was right, but it was hard to feel grateful when she was essentially a prisoner in a marble castle, married to a man, a vampire who treated her more like a responsibility than a person. Everything changed the night of the Blood Moon Festival. Valentina had explained that vampires celebrated certain astronomical events with elaborate parties, and the blood moon, when all three moons aligned and turned crimson, was the most important. The entire court gathered in the grand ballroom, dressed in their finest, to dance and drink and revel in their immortal glory. Aria had been dressed in a gown of deep red that made her look like she was drenched in blood herself. Garnets sparkled at her throat and wrists, gifts from Bastien that had arrived with a note saying simply, "These suit you." Her hair had been arranged in intricate braids wound through with gold thread. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. "You look like a queen," Valentina said with satisfaction. "Now remember, stay close to Master Bastien. The festival can become intense. The blood wine flows freely, and vampires lose some of their usual control. You don't want to be alone in a room full of intoxicated predators." The ballroom was magnificent and terrifying. Chandeliers of blood-red crystal cast crimson light over everything. Music played strange, haunting melodies that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Vampires danced with inhuman grace, their movements too fluid and perfect to be natural. And everywhere, servants moved through the crowd carrying goblets of thick, dark liquid that Aria very much did not want to think about. Bastien was waiting for her at the entrance. He wore black as always, but tonight his coat was embroidered with silver patterns that caught the red light and seemed to writhe like living things. His white hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp lines of his face. When he saw her, something flickered in his silver eyes. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. The compliment sounded surprised, as though he hadn't meant to voice it. "Thank you." Aria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You look regal." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest she had ever seen from him. "Stay near me tonight," he said, echoing Valentina's warning. "The festival can become dangerous for humans." He offered his arm, and Aria took it, letting him lead her into the ballroom. The crowd parted for them, vampires bowing and curtsying as their king passed. Aria kept her head high, channeling every lesson Valentina had drilled into her about projecting confidence, even when she felt terrified. They danced. Aria had learned the basic steps from Valentina, but dancing with Bastien was different. He moved with such perfect grace that he made her feel graceful too, guiding her through complex patterns that should have been beyond her skill. His hand was cool against her back, his touch firm but never restrictive. And for the first time since their wedding, they were close enough that she could feel his breath against her hair, could see the fine details of his face, could notice that his eyes weren't purely silver, but held flecks of blue like ice. "You've adapted well," he said as they moved through the steps. "Most humans would have broken by now, demanded to go home or retreated into denial." "I did break," Aria said honestly. "That first night, alone in my rooms, I cried for hours. But then I realized breaking didn't change anything. So I put myself back together and decided to survive. It's what I've always done." Something shifted in Bastien's expression. "Your stepfather, your mother, they hurt you often." Aria hadn't talked about her past, not to anyone here. But something about the way Bastien asked quiet and without judgment made the words come easier. "My real father died when I was 12. My mother remarried a year later. Her new husband was not a good man. He drank, got angry, took it out on both of us. But my mother was so afraid of being alone that she never left, just became smaller and quieter until she was barely there at all." She met Bastien's eyes. "I tried to protect her. Tried to take the worst of it so he'd leave her alone. But nothing I did was ever enough. And when I turned 22, he started talking about marrying me off to one of his friends, someone who would keep me in line. That's when I found the matrimonial agency brochure. I thought it was my escape." "And it was," Bastien said softly. "Just not in the way you expected." "No." Aria managed a small smile. "I expected maybe a lonely farmer who wanted help with his land, or a widower with children who needed a mother, not a vampire king in a marble castle." "If you had gotten the lonely farmer," Bastien said, his eyes intent on hers, "would you have been happy?" Aria thought about that. "I don't know. Maybe. I never let myself think about happiness, just survival." "Then perhaps," Bastien said, "we're not so different. I've spent centuries surviving rather than living, maintaining power without enjoying it. Perhaps we're both just trying to endure." The song ended. They stood together on the dance floor, surrounded by whirling vampires, and for a moment something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition, the sense that two lonely people had somehow found each other in the darkness. Then Constantine's voice cut through the moment like a blade. How touching! The king and his bought bride playing at romance. He appeared at the edge of the dance floor, a goblet of blood wine in his hand, his red eyes bright with cruelty. "Tell me, Aria, does he kiss you when the court isn't watching? Or does he save his affection for the humans he feeds from?" Aria felt Bastien go rigid beside her. Around them, the other vampires were slowing, sensing drama, turning to watch. "That's enough, Constantine," Bastien said, his voice deadly quiet. "Is it?" Constantine stepped onto the dance floor. "I think the court deserves to know the truth about their queen, that she's nothing but a legal convenience, that you don't even desire her enough to complete the bonding, that this entire marriage is a sham designed to circumvent laws you find inconvenient." He looked around at the gathered vampires. "Our king speaks of honor and tradition, but he's using this girl to maintain power while giving her nothing in return. Is that the kind of ruler we want? Someone who twists the law to suit himself?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Aria saw doubt on some faces, calculation on others. She felt her careful position in this court crumbling, felt the political ground shifting beneath her feet. And something inside her snapped. She was tired of being used as a weapon against Bastien, tired of being the weakness everyone exploited, tired of being afraid. "You're right," she said loudly, stepping away from Bastien. The ballroom went silent. This marriage started as an arrangement, a transaction. He needed a wife. I needed saving. There was no love, no romance, no fairy tale. She turned to face the court, to face all those beautiful, terrible faces. But you know what? He still saved me. When he could have let me be sold to you, Lord Constantine, let me be tortured and broken and killed over the course of decades, he chose instead to marry me himself, to protect me, to give me safety and freedom and respect. Her voice was shaking now, but she pushed on. Maybe he doesn't love me. Maybe he never will. But he's treated me with more kindness than any human man ever did. He's given me more choice than I've ever had. And if that's not enough for you, if you think I should be miserable and resentful, then you're no better than the people I was running from." The silence was absolute. Aria could feel every vampire in the room staring at her, judging her, weighing her words. She had probably just destroyed whatever political standing she had. But she didn't care. She was so tired of being afraid. Then Bastien moved. He stepped up beside her, his hand finding hers, his fingers threading through hers in a gesture of unity. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. "My queen has spoken, and she's right. Our marriage began as necessity, but necessity doesn't negate value. She is under my protection not because of any law, but because I choose to protect her, because she deserves safety and respect. And anyone who challenges that challenges her will answer to me directly." He looked at Constantine. "Including you, old friend. Choose your next words carefully." Constantine stared at them both, his beautiful face twisted with frustration. Then he deliberately took a drink from his goblet and bowed mockingly. "Of course, Majesty, I would never challenge your choice. I simply want what's best for the realm." "What's best for the realm is stability and honor," Bastien said coldly. "Both of which I provide. This conversation is over." He led Aria from the ballroom, his hand still gripping hers, his pace quick enough that she had to hurry to keep up. They didn't stop until they reached a balcony overlooking the impossible city, the 3 blood-red moons hanging huge and low in the sky. "You shouldn't have defended me," Bastien said, releasing her hand and moving to the balcony rail. "It only gives Constantine more ammunition." "I don't care." Aria joined him at the rail, her heart still racing. "I'm tired of being everyone's pawn. If I'm going to be your wife, if I'm going to be queen of this place, then I'm going to actually be those things, not just stand there silent while people use me to hurt you." Bastien turned to look at her, and in the crimson moonlight, his face was softer than she had ever seen it. "Why do you care if they hurt me? I've given you nothing but obligation and danger." "You've given me safety," Aria corrected, "and respect, and choice, when you could have just commanded me to do whatever you wanted. You could have bonded with me without asking, could have forced the intimacy that would strengthen your claim. But you didn't. You gave me the power to refuse. That's more than anyone else has ever given me." She paused, gathering courage. "And maybe I don't want to refuse anymore." The words hung between them in the red-tinted air. Bastien had gone very still, his silver eyes wide. "Aria, you don't know what you're saying. The bonding, it's permanent. Once done, it can never be undone. You would be connected to me until the day you die. You'd feel my emotions, my hungers, the weight of my immortal nature pressing against your mortality." "I know." Aria's heart was hammering, but she kept her voice steady. "Valentina explained it, and I've thought about it. A lot, actually. I'm already bound to you legally, already living in your world, dependent on your protection. The bonding wouldn't change my circumstances. It would just make them more honest. It would also make you a target." Bastien's voice was rough now, strained. Constantine would see it as a vulnerability, something he could exploit. "Constantine already sees me as a vulnerability," Aria pointed out. "At least if we're bonded. He can't claim the marriage is invalid. Can't try to undermine you through me." "Is that why you're offering?" The question came out almost pained. Politics? Aria stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the cool presence of his body, the supernatural stillness that marked him as something other than human. At first, maybe, but not anymore. I've watched you, Bastien. Watched how you rule with mercy when you could rule with cruelty. How you carry the weight of this realm alone because you won't let anyone close enough to share it. How you've kept yourself distant from me to preserve my choice, even when closeness would benefit you politically. She reached up and touched his face, her warm fingers against his cool skin. I'm offering because I want to, because maybe we're both tired of surviving alone. For a long moment, Bastien just stared at her, something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. Then he covered her hand with his, pressing it against his cheek. If we do this, he said quietly, I will want you, truly want you, not just as a political necessity. The bonding creates desire, connection, need. I've held myself apart from you because I thought it was fair, but if we share blood, I won't be able to maintain that distance, and I'm afraid of that. Why? Aria asked softly. Because the last time I let someone matter to me, it destroyed me. The words came out broken. 200 years ago, I loved someone, a human woman named Elizabeth. She was brilliant and brave and beautiful, and I bonded with her despite knowing the risks. For 30 years we were happy. And then she grew old while I remained unchanged, watched her become fragile and weak, watched her die slowly while I could do nothing but ease her pain. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. When she finally passed, the bonding broke. It felt like having my soul torn in half. I swore I would never endure that again. Never love anyone enough to be destroyed by their mortality. Aria's heart ached for him. I'm sorry. I didn't know. No one knows except Valentina and a few others who were there. Bastien closed his eyes. I've kept it buried for 2 centuries. But if we bond, Aria, I'll have to feel it all again. Have to watch you age and die. Have to endure the breaking of our connection when your mortal life ends. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Maybe you don't have to be strong alone this time, Aria said. She moved closer until their bodies were nearly touching. Maybe that's the point of bonding, sharing the burden. I'll age and die, that's inevitable. But we could have decades together first, decades of not being alone. Isn't that worth the eventual pain? Bastien opened his eyes and looked at her with such naked longing that her breath caught. You're very brave for a human who was terrified mere weeks ago. I'm terrified now, Aria admitted, but I'm tired of letting fear control me. I spent years afraid of my stepfather, afraid of being hurt, afraid to hope for anything better. I don't want to live that way anymore. I want to choose something for myself, and I choose this. I choose you. The last word was barely out of her mouth before Bastien kissed her. His lips were cool against hers, his touch gentle but hungry, and Aria felt heat bloom through her entire body. She had never been kissed like this, like she was precious and desired and necessary all at once. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up loneliness and need that had been building since she arrived in this strange realm. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard despite only one of them needing air, Bastien rested his forehead against hers. The bonding requires an exchange of blood, he said, his voice rough. I'll need to drink from you, and you'll need to drink from me. It won't hurt, I'll make sure of that. But it will change you, connect us permanently. Are you absolutely certain? Yes, Aria said without hesitation. I'm certain. Bastien pulled back slightly, his silver eyes searching hers one last time. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded once, and then guided her to sit on the stone bench that ran along the balcony. The 3 red moons hung above them like watching eyes. Give me your wrist, he said softly. Aria held out her arm, trying not to shake. Bastien cradled her wrist in both his hands, his touch reverent. Then he bent and pressed his lips to the delicate skin over her pulse point. She felt his fangs extend sharp points of pressure and then a brief sting as they pierced her skin. But he was right. It didn't hurt. Instead, warmth spread from the bite point through her entire body, a languid heat that made her feel heavy and relaxed. She watched, fascinated and strangely aroused as Bastien drank from her wrist. His eyes had closed, his expression almost peaceful. After a moment he pulled away, his lips stained red. "Your turn," he said quietly. He bit into his own wrist, deep enough that blood welled up dark and gleaming. "Drink." "Not much, just a few swallows." Aria hesitated for only a heartbeat, then she took his wrist and brought it to her lips. The blood tasted strange, not metallic like she expected, but rich and complex, almost spiced. She swallowed once, twice, 3 times, and felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening, like a bridge being built between her soul and something vast and ancient. She pulled away, gasping. The world had changed. She could feel Bastien now, feel his presence like a warm weight in the back of her mind. His emotions were there, too, relief and desire and fear and something that felt almost like joy, all tangled together. "I can feel you," she whispered. "And I you." Bastien's voice was full of wonder. "Your courage, your determination, your loneliness that mirrors mine." He pulled her close, wrapping her in his arms. "We're bonded now, connected. Until death parts us, you're mine, and I'm yours." Aria leaned into him, feeling truly safe for the first time in her memory. "What happens now?" "Now we return to the festival and make it known that we're fully bonded. That will end Constantine's challenges once and for all." Bastien pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And then we start learning how to be not just husband and wife, but partners. It will take time. The bonding connects us, but understanding each other will require effort." "I have time," Aria said, "and so do you. Centuries of it." They stood together on the balcony under the blood-red moons, 2 lonely souls finding unexpected connection in the darkness. When they finally returned to the ballroom, something had fundamentally shifted between them. They moved as one now, their bodies instinctively adjusting to match each other's rhythm. When Bastien announced that the bonding was complete, Aria felt his pride and satisfaction echo through her like a second heartbeat. Constantine's face went white with fury, but he said nothing. There was nothing he could say. A completed bonding was sacred among vampires, unbreakable and legally absolute. Aria was truly queen now, bound to their king by blood and soul. The weeks that followed were an education in intimacy. The bonding meant Bastien could no longer maintain his careful distance. He sought her out constantly, not just for court appearances, but for simple companionship. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their vastly different lives. He taught her about vampire history and politics. She taught him about human resilience and hope. And they learned each other's bodies with the slow patience of people who knew they had years to explore every detail. Bastien was a considerate lover, careful of her mortality, always aware that his supernatural strength could hurt her if he wasn't cautious. But he was also passionate, bringing centuries of experience to their bed, learning what made her gasp and tremble with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. "I had forgotten," he murmured one night as they lay tangled together in his massive bed. "How good it feels to not be alone, to have someone who matters." Aria traced patterns on his cool chest, feeling his emotions through the bond contentment and desire and lingering fear that this happiness couldn't last. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "Not yet," he agreed quietly. "But eventually, your mortality is decades away," Aria interrupted firmly. "Stop borrowing sorrow from the future. We have now. Let's focus on that." Bastien pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "You make it sound simple." "Maybe it is. Maybe we've both spent so long being complicated that we forgot how to be simple." She kissed his shoulder. "I love you. You love me. Everything else is just details." She felt his surprise through the bond sharp and bright. "I haven't said that." "You didn't need to. I can feel it." Aria propped herself up to look at him. "The bond doesn't lie. You love me, and I love you. We can say the words or not, but the truth is there either way." Bastien stared at her for a long moment, then laughed a real laugh, rich and genuine. "When did you become so wise?" "Probably around the time I married a vampire king and ended up in a parallel realm," Aria grinned. "Surviving impossible situations builds character." "That it does. Bastien pulled her down for a kiss that communicated everything words couldn't. And through the bond, Aria felt his love wrap around her like armor and wings both, protecting and freeing her simultaneously. Months passed in their own rhythm. Aria learned to navigate the vampire court with increasing skill, earning respect not just as Bastien's bonded queen, but as herself. She established a council to address issues facing the few humans who lived in the eternal court servants and companions and scholars who had chosen this realm over their own. She implemented reforms to the blood-gathering system, ensuring that humans who donated did so willingly and with fair compensation. She became, against all odds, a true queen. Constantine continued to circle them like a shark, but without legal grounds to challenge the marriage, his power diminished. Other vampires began to see Aria not as a weakness, but as evidence of Bastien's strength. His willingness to bond with a human showed confidence, not desperation. And through it all, Aria and Bastien grew closer. The bonding that had started as political necessity became genuine partnership. They balanced each other, her warmth tempering his coldness, his ancient wisdom steadying her youth. They argued and laughed and made love and governed together, building something neither had expected to find. One night, about a year after their bonding, Bastien took Aria to a part of the castle she had never seen, a tower room filled with paintings and sculptures and beautiful objects collected over centuries. At the center of the room stood a portrait of a human woman with kind eyes and dark hair touched with gray. "Elizabeth," Bastien said quietly. "I had this painted in the last year of her life. She wanted me to remember her as she truly was, not just young and beautiful." Aria studied the portrait, feeling Bastien's grief and love through the bond-old pain, worn smooth by centuries but still present. She was lovely. She was. Bastien came to stand beside Aria. "I thought keeping this room locked away would protect me from the pain, but I've realized something since bonding with you. The pain is part of the love. Trying to avoid one means losing both." "What are you saying?" Aria asked softly. "I'm saying I'm not afraid anymore." Bastien turned to face her fully. "You're mortal. Eventually you'll age and die and leave me alone again. The bonding will break and I'll feel like I'm being torn apart. I know all of this, and I choose it anyway, choose you anyway, because the decades we have together are worth the eventual sorrow." Tears pricked Aria's eyes. "That's the most romantic and depressing thing anyone's ever said to me." Bastien smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his face from beautiful to radiant. "I've had 300 years to think about love and loss. That's the best I can offer." "It's enough." Aria wrapped her arms around him, feeling his love through the bond like sunshine. "More than enough." They stood together in the tower room, surrounded by memories of the past, building memories for the future. And for the first time in either of their long, lonely existences, neither felt alone. The crisis came, as crises do, when they least expected it. Aria had been queen for nearly 2 years when Constantine made his final move. He appeared at court with representatives from the oldest vampire bloodline's elders, whose authority predated even Bastien's long reign. "We request a formal hearing," Constantine announced, his red eyes glittering with triumph, "regarding the king's fitness to rule." The throne room went silent. Bastien, seated on his obsidian throne with Aria standing beside him, remained perfectly still. But through the bond, Aria felt his shock and anger. "On what grounds?" Bastien's voice was dangerously calm. "On the grounds that you have become compromised by your bonding with a human," Constantine gestured to Aria. "You've allowed your mortal queen to implement reforms that weaken our traditional power structures. You've softened the blood laws. You've granted humans in this realm rights they never had before. You're diluting vampire supremacy for the sake of keeping your bride happy." "I'm governing with mercy and wisdom," Bastien countered, "as I always have." "You're governing with human sentiment," one of the elders said, an ancient female vampire whose white hair fell to her knees. "We understand the necessity of your bonding, but we question whether maintaining it serves the realm's best interests. The human will die soon regardless. Perhaps it's time to let her return to her world and allow you to rule without her influence." Aria felt ice flood her veins. They were trying to separate her from Bastien, trying to undo everything they had built. "Absolutely not," Bastien said, steel in his voice. "My wife is my bonded partner and your rightful queen. Her mortality doesn't diminish her authority, and her reforms have strengthened the realm, not weakened it. This hearing is a waste of the council's time." "Let the council decide that," Constantine said smoothly. "We request a formal vote. If the majority agrees that your bonding compromises your judgment, you'll be required to break the bond and send the human away. You'll retain your throne, but without her influence." "You can't break a bonding," Aria said, finding her voice despite her fear. "It's permanent until death." "There are ways," the ancient female elder said, not unkindly. "Dark rituals that can sever even sacred bonds. They're painful and dangerous, but possible. The king knows this." Through the bond, Aria felt Bastien's horror and fury. He stood from his throne, power radiating from him in waves that made even the elders step back. "I will not break my bond with Aria, not for the council, not for political convenience, not for anything. If you want me to remain king, you accept her as my queen. Those are my terms." "Then you choose to risk your throne for a mortal who will be dead in a handful of decades?" Constantine's voice dripped with false sympathy. "How noble, how foolish." "I choose love over power," Bastien said clearly, "every time, without hesitation. If that makes me unfit to rule, then perhaps I shouldn't rule." The throne room erupted in chaos, vampires shouting, arguing, taking sides. Aria stood frozen beside Bastien's throne, feeling his determination through the bond, but also his anguish. He was willing to give up everything, his throne, his realm, his purpose, rather than lose her. The sacrifice was beautiful and terrible, and she couldn't let him make it. "Wait!" Her voice cut through the noise. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to her. Aria took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Lord Constantine, you claim I'm a bad influence on the king, that my mortal perspective weakens his judgment, but you've never actually asked me what I think or why I've suggested the reforms I have. You've just assumed I'm trying to undermine vampire society." "Your intentions are irrelevant," Constantine said dismissively. "The results speak for themselves." "Do they?" Aria looked around at the assembled vampires. "Before my reforms, humans in this realm lived in constant fear. They donated blood because they had no choice, served because they were compelled, and had no legal protections against abuse. Now they're compensated fairly for their contributions. They can choose whether to stay or return to the human world. And abuse is punished rather than ignored." She turned to the elders. "Has that weakened the realm, or has it made it more stable because the humans who serve here do so willingly rather than out of terror?" The ancient female elder tilted her head thoughtfully. "Continue. You say I'll die soon, and my influence will vanish. But I'm not trying to change vampire society permanently. I'm trying to make it more sustainable." Aria felt Bastien's pride through the bond, giving her strength to continue. "You've ruled through fear and absolute power for millennia. And it's worked because you're stronger than humans. But strength alone doesn't create loyalty. It creates resentment that festers until it explodes. I've lived that reality. My stepfather ruled through fear and strength, and all it did was make everyone around him miserable and angry." She moved closer to the Council of Elders, aware that she was taking a huge risk by speaking so boldly, but unable to stop. "Bastien isn't weak because he loves me. He's stronger. Love requires courage, requires vulnerability, requires caring about something enough to risk losing it. Those qualities make him a better king, not a worse one. And if you can't see that, if you're so bound to tradition that you'd rather have a powerful tyrant than a powerful leader, then maybe the problem isn't him. Maybe it's you." The silence that followed was profound. Aria could feel her heart hammering, could feel Bastien's shock and admiration through the bond. She had just essentially called the oldest and most powerful vampires in the realm cowards. This would either win her respect or get her killed. The ancient female elder studied Aria for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled a cold expression that held amusement nonetheless. "You have courage, little queen, more than most vampires I've known." She looked at Constantine. "I've heard enough. The reforms she mentions are sensible. The king's judgment has not been compromised. If anything, it has deepened. I vote against this ridiculous hearing." One by one, the other elders concurred. Even those who had seemed sympathetic to Constantine's position acknowledged that Bastien's rule had improved, not deteriorated, since his bonding with Aria. The vote was nearly unanimous. The hearing was dismissed. Constantine looked like he wanted to kill someone, probably Aria herself. But with the council's decision made, he had no choice but to bow stiffly and retreat. His red eyes promised that this wasn't over, but for now, he was defeated. When the throne room finally cleared, Bastien pulled Aria into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "That was incredibly reckless," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You could have provoked the council into executing you for disrespect." "But I didn't." Aria pulled back enough to see his face. "I'm tired of being afraid, Bastien. Tired of letting people like Constantine dictate how we live. You were willing to give up your throne for me. The least I could do was fight for us." "You did more than fight. You won." Bastien kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I love you. So much it terrifies me sometimes. I love you too." Aria felt the truth of it through their bond, flowing both directions, an endless loop of affection and need. "And we're going to have decades to be terrified together." "Yes." Bastien's smile was soft and real. "Decades. And I'll treasure every moment." They stood together in the empty throne room, king and queen, vampire and human, bonded and in love. Outside, the three moons of the eternal court rose in the sky, bathing the realm in their otherworldly light. And for the first time in 300 years, Bastien didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. He felt hope instead. The years that followed were the happiest Aria had ever known and the most peaceful Bastien had experienced in centuries. They ruled together, balancing the old traditions with new reforms, maintaining the strength of the vampire realm while making it more just. Constantine eventually left the Eternal Court, unable to bear watching his enemies thrive. Other vampires took his place, younger ones who had known nothing but Bastien's enlightened rule and saw Aria as a natural part of their world. Aria's reforms spread beyond just human rights. She established libraries open to all, created systems for resolving disputes without violence, and even convinced Bastien to hold regular courts where any vampire or human could petition their king directly. The realm flourished under their joint leadership, but time, as it always does, marched forward. Aria turned 30, then 35, then 40. She aged with grace, her dark hair gaining threads of silver, her face developing laugh lines around her eyes. Through the bond, she felt Bastien's grief every time he noticed a new sign of her mortality. But she also felt his love, unwavering and deep, holding her close against the inevitable. On her 50th birthday, they held a celebration in the grand ballroom. Vampires and humans mingled freely now, a sight that would have been impossible before Aria's arrival. Valentina had decorated everything in Aria's favorite colors, deep blues and silvers that made the marble castle sparkle like ice. "You've changed so much," Bastien murmured as they danced together, his movements automatically adjusting to accommodate her slower, older body. "And yet you're still the same brave woman who defended me before the council." "I'm grayer and more wrinkled," Aria said with a laugh. "But yes, still me. Still beautiful." Bastien's voice held nothing but sincerity. "Still mine." "Still yours," Aria agreed. Through the bond, she felt his sorrow lurking beneath the joy. She had maybe 30 years left if she was lucky. For a vampire who counted age and centuries, it was nothing. A heartbeat, a sigh. But they had learned to live in the present rather than mourning the future. They took joy in small things, watching the moon rise together, reading in the library, governing their realm, making love with the comfortable intimacy of long partnership. They built a life that mattered, a love that would echo even after Aria's mortality claimed her. When Aria was 65, she began to feel the first shadows of serious illness. Nothing dramatic, just a persistent fatigue that no amount of rest could cure. The vampire physicians examined her and told Bastien what he already knew through the bond. Her heart was failing. She had perhaps 5 years left, maybe less. Bastien took the news with outward calm, but Aria felt his devastation through their connection. That night, he held her close and wept for the first time in their decades together. "I'm not ready," he said against her hair. I knew this was coming, but I'm not ready to lose you." "No one's ever ready to say goodbye," Aria said softly, running her fingers through his white hair. "But we've had 40 years, Bastien. 40 years of love and partnership and joy. How many people can say that? How many humans live their entire lives without finding what we have? It's not enough." His voice was raw. "It will never be enough." "I know." Aria kissed his forehead, his cheeks tasting his tears. "But it's what we have. So let's make it count." They did. The final years were bittersweet, filled with moments of profound beauty and creeping sorrow. Aria worked to ensure all her reforms would survive her death, training younger administrators to continue her work. She spent long hours with Bastien, talking about everything and nothing, making memories to sustain him through the lonely centuries ahead. She also made him promise something. "When I die, don't lock yourself away again. Don't become the cold, isolated king you were when I met you. Stay connected to the people who care about you. Keep the reforms. Keep living, not just surviving." "I'll try," Bastien promised, though they both felt through the bond how difficult it would be. In the end, Aria died peacefully in their bed, Bastien holding her close, the bond between them pulsing with love even as her body failed. Her last words were, "Thank you for saving me, for giving me a life worth living." And then she was gone, and Bastien felt the bonding break, that sacred connection shattering like glass, leaving him gasping with pain that went beyond physical. It felt exactly like having his soul torn apart, just as he had feared. But this time, he wasn't alone in his grief. Valentina was there, and other members of his court who had come to genuinely care for their queen. They gave him space to mourn, but refused to let him disappear entirely. They reminded him of his promises to Aria, of the life she had wanted him to continue living. It took decades, a long time even by vampire standards, but gradually Bastien healed. The wound of Aria's loss never fully closed, but it scarred over, becoming part of him rather than consuming him. He kept the reforms she had championed, kept the library system and the dispute resolution courts and the protections for humans. He ruled with the mercy and wisdom she had helped him develop, honoring her memory through action rather than isolation. And sometimes, when the 3 moons rose just right, he would stand on the balcony where they had first bonded and feel her presence like an echo. Not truly there, vampires didn't believe in ghosts, but remembered so vividly that it almost didn't matter. He would remember her courage in defending him before the council, her laughter as she tried to master vampire dance steps, her warm body pressed against his cool one, her insistence that love was worth the inevitable pain. She'd been right, of course. She usually was. The 40 years they had together were worth the grief that followed, were worth everything. And though Bastien would carry the ache of her absence for the rest of his immortal life, he also carried the joy she had brought him, the hope, the proof that even creatures like him could love and be loved in return. Aria had come to him as a desperate stranger fleeing a cruel family. She had woken in a marble castle in an impossible realm, married to a vampire king who kept her at arm's length, and through courage and stubbornness and love, she had transformed both of their lives, had proven that the greatest strength wasn't isolation, but connection. That vulnerability wasn't weakness, but the foundation of everything worth having. In the centuries that followed, Bastien ruled with honor and kept Aria's memory alive through the just, compassionate realm they had built together. And when younger vampires asked him about the human queen whose portrait hung in the throne room, he would smile a real, warm smile and tell them the story. How she married a silent stranger to flee her cruel family. How she woke in the vampire king's marble castle. And how, against all odds, they found not just safety or convenience, but true love. The kind of love that echoed across lifetimes, that changed the course of history, that proved mortality and immortality could meet and create something beautiful. It was the greatest story he knew. And it was true.